Hi, welcome. Welcome. So nice to have you all here. Welcome to FDN in Practice. My name is Elizabeth Gaines. I am the Education Director for FDN. I will be joined here momentarily by Reed Davis, who is the founder of FDN. And we are really excited to talk to you today about the mucosal barrier as one of our fundamental healing opportunities here at FDN. So while we are waiting for everybody to get in the room, please put in the chat where you are in the world and one thing that you're hoping to learn today. I'd love to see who you all are, what you're doing, what you're up to. So just put in the chat where you are and what you're hoping to learn. Idaho, Portugal, nice. Pennsylvania, Poland, Buffalo, Illinois, Texas, Minneapolis, amazing. NYC, terrific. Silicon Valley. Brenda, it looks like Reed's trying to get in. You can help him out. Thank you. Amazing. And what are some of the things you're hoping to learn? Kat says hoping to gain some more insight into how metabolic chaos and gut permeability intertwine. That's great, Kat. That's exactly what we're going to learn today. So that's fantastic. Reed, welcome.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I was sitting there knocking on the door, and I think in the future I just need to be added as a panelist, and then we can just get rolling right along. Nice to see you. I understand you just got back from Austin, Texas, where you were a superstar at a health optimization summit. How'd that go?
I think it went really well, Reed. There was a lot of really engaged people there, a lot of smart conversations going on, a lot of learning and a lot of sharing, and a great opportunity to get together with the FDN community.
Yeah, it's always fun to get together with our fellow FTNs.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you guys for sharing. It's so nice to have all of you on with us today. So we are going to talk about FDN in practice. What does it look like when the rubber meets the road? What does it look like when we take our methodology and apply that to lab testing? So today we're going to talk about the mucosal barrier specifically, but we're just going to give a little introduction to FDN and our methodology first, so that when we drop into this lesson about the mucosal barrier, it will make sense and it will have context and you can see sort of where in the process it fits. So we are going to start with what we call our brain-body diagram. So this is a new way of looking at disease. So as Reed always says when he starts this, what is that thing that sits in your skull on top of your body? It is your brain, of course. And the brain is connected to the body through several informational channels. So one of those is blood, and that's going to be carrying information from the brain throughout the rest of the body through blood, through hormones, through nutrients, and through immune assets. And then you have your nervous system, where the brain is telling the body how to react in dynamic situations and in every moment. And then you have that more ineffable quality called chi, or that sort of energy or life force that flows through the body. So when all of these things are working well and you have great communication between the brain and the body, you have 100% function. That is where we're meant to be. The body knows what it's doing. The body wants to be working at 100%. You don't have to teach your cells what to do. You don't have to teach your lungs how to breathe or your heart how to beat. So your body knows that it wants to be at optimal function. And when it is, we have this state of ease. We also call this vital reserve. And we can think about vital reserve as if our body had a bank account, then the vital reserve would be the bank account. And however much money is in our vital reserve bank account, that's what we have to spend upstream on healing to keep us at that 100% function. So now we've got a symptom. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, a symptom is the last thing to happen. So a symptom being there tells us that we don't have 100% function. So we are in now malfunction. There is something going on in these communication systems between the brain and the body. And now we are in a state of dis-ease, where there is actually money coming out of our vital reserve bank account trying to fix the problems. So we do call this, when we've got symptoms and we've got this state of malfunction and disease, we call this metabolic chaos. And we will talk more specifically about what metabolic chaos is in a moment. But just in general, we've got malfunction, disease, money being spent on healing, symptoms coming up. We call this metabolic chaos. So you might go to the doctor at this point where you're having symptoms, you don't have 100% function, you're in this state of dis-ease. And the doctor might say, okay, let's get you some relief. So that's either going to happen through pills or surgery. Or if you go to a functional type of doctor, this might happen through supplements or other modalities. But it's always about relieving the symptoms.
A lot of people, they just go down to the grocery store and start walking up and down the aisles of all the pills and reading labels and asking the staff for help and things. And the idea is that they're really just trying to get rid of the symptom, and nothing has really changed.
Yes, for sure. With the self-medication is right in there with the relief care that we're talking about. And so it's important to remember that the symptom is just the flag on the play. That's just the referee saying, hey, we need to check the tape. It is not actually telling us what is wrong. So we can't know from the symptom where the problem is in this brain-body miscommunication, in this chain of malfunction and dis-ease. So as we apply relief care, we may get these symptoms to actually decrease or go away altogether, but we haven't addressed the dis-ease or the malfunction. We haven't addressed the money that is hemorrhaging from our vital reserve bank account. And so those symptoms are going to come back, maybe with a vengeance, somewhere different, worse. And that's a general issue with this type of approach. So our new paradigm is that we're going to focus on resolving the metabolic chaos. So what is happening here in this malfunction square? What is happening in this dis-ease square? Do we actually have enough money in the vital reserve bank account to spend on healing upstream? So we're going to provide that intelligent relief care while we're working on solving that metabolic chaos. But this is really where the juice is in the malfunction and dis-ease circles. It's not in the symptom circle. So we're going to look at these things that cause distress, these things that create the malfunction and dis-ease. And from the FDN perspective, we call this, we think of stress as two types. One is good and one is bad. So the bad type of stress is the distress. And distress can be thought of as anything that costs money out of your vital reserve bank account. And so we define distress in three general categories. The first is mental emotional. We all know, like, that's the first thing we think of when we think about stress, is like, where are my big mental emotional rocks? Do I like my job? Am I happy in my relationship? Am I caring for aging parents? Do I have children that need attention? Do I have enough money? Do I like my life? Like, these are the things that are happening in that mental emotional category. And then we get into our physical distress. Who in the audience sits in a chair too long every day? Yes, absolutely. Who assaults themselves with blue light from screens every day? Yes. Yes. Yep. Who could be exercising more? I could. Who needs to be exercising less? Of all of you out there in the audience, my acupuncturists and my massage therapists and my chiropractors, you guys have this sort of repetitive motion that is wearing on your joints, causing a lot of physical pain or physical stress. And anybody that's not getting a chiropractic adjustment or body work is probably suffering from some misalignment that is certainly costing some money out of the bank account. Then we
And
get
in my case, it's old trauma from I call them war wounds. Just having a very well used body that took I kind of did some silly things, overused this area and that area, and so that doesn't go away by itself. Sometimes some are self-limiting and they heal, but a lot of times we're walking around with all of that built up in us. It's just one more type of stress.
Yeah, that's very true, Reed. I was a gymnast in my youth, and that has come back to haunt me in several ways. So I get it. Yeah, and then our last category of distress is in the environmental. So what are you cooking your food in? What are you storing it in? What are you putting on your body in terms of your personal care products? What is the quality of the air that you are breathing in or the water that you are drinking? What's going on in your car? What's going on in your work environment? All of these things make a difference. So distress is cumulative. Certainly, our mental emotional stressors are costing us tons of money, but all of these other stressors, these ones that are costing pennies and dollars, it's all cumulative. So if we can keep as many stressors as possible out of our existence, then we can keep that money in the bank. And then the Vital Reserve Bank account has that money to spend upstream on healing, on this malfunction, on this disease, so that we can come back into more function and greater ease. So what we do is we identify healing opportunities and apply wellness principles. And through that, normal function is restored. And we identify these healing opportunities through lab work, which we are going to discuss in detail in a moment. So this really happens during our corrective phase of care. So we talked about relief, where we're going to get in and do some intelligent allopathy to help with those symptoms. But it's really in the corrective phase that we're going to come in and correct the imbalances that the labs showed us. We're going to really measure where function has been lost, where we are now in malfunction, and where dis-ease is occurring to really bring the body back into a place where it can function normally. And then we're going to get into this maintenance phase. After function has been restored, after we've put more money in the Vital Reserve Bank account, after we're back in the state of ease, how do we keep it there? So this is a very important phase to be able to work through with our clients and let them empower them to be able to maintain their health from that point forward. So the body returns to a state of ease, health is restored, symptoms disappear, complaints often permanently resolve when you know what steps to take. So when we're talking about resolving metabolic chaos, let's just remind ourselves what metabolic chaos is, in case this is your first time with us. So metabolic chaos is the idea that symptoms are vague and they can be the result of multiple root causes. So we cannot know the cause from the symptom. So just like this beautiful picture of the ripples on the surface of the pond, if I throw a rock in a pond, it's going to cause a ripple. And that's then going to ripple out and cause other ripples. And then those ripples are going to crash into each other and cause more ripples. And those ripples are going to crash into each other and cause more ripples. Now it doesn't matter that the original incident was me throwing the rock. Now we've got chaos on the surface of the water that is acting independently of what I did. It is creating its own ripples and chaos. So because the symptom can't tell us what's wrong, then the sounds like method is never going to yield predictable results. Oh, it sounds like parasites. It sounds like hormones. It sounds like leaky gut. So we've got to measure the dysfunction in all of the foundational systems to address those deficits. And that method is going to outperform symptom chasing and guessing at the root cause. So for us as FDNs, it looks like this. We're going to measure the loss of function in those foundational systems, which we think of as hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and nervous system. And we've got our bonus oxidative stress here as well. And these bubbles here represent the ripples on the lake in the picture that we just saw. So when we have imbalance in one, it doesn't stay siloed. It does the same thing as the ripples on the water. It careens into other ripples and crashes into other ripples and causes other ripples. So we want to get a picture in these foundational systems of how much function has been lost. And so step one of our process is to sort out the metabolic chaos with functional lab work. So we're going to measure. We're going to do a functional diagnostic where we're going to say out of these 6 systems, out of 100% function, how much has been lost and where. And that's what our lab work is going to tell us. And then once we have that lab data, we're going to be able to correlate that with our client and their symptoms, their history, the way that they've lived their lives, and be able to make then targeted recommendations in diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation to be able to address in the corrective phase those imbalances that were shown to us in the lab data. Putting in money in that vital reserve bank account, spending it on these imbalances. And then now when these imbalances get corrected, now the body can spend it upstream on some of these ripples that are crashing into each other that we didn't measure and we haven't seen. So then step 3 of our process is to run the DRESS program. So everyone is different, but they're going to go through those phases that we talked about: relief, corrective, and maintenance. And we're going to walk with them through this process so that we can steer the ship in other directions, understand how the process is going, and get the best possible health outcome at the end of that process. So that is our overview of FDN. And so we want to then come and look at the mucosal barrier in specific and see why we consider this to be one of our foundational healing opportunities. So we're about to dive into some slides that are straight from our course. So this is a little sneak peek into what it's like to be in the course. And we are going to start with where we have locations of mucosal barriers in our body. Reed, would you like to take over the mucosal barrier teaching?
If you want me to. First of all, great job so far explaining that metabolic chaos is a state where multiple causal factors are all having an effect, not only on your body all at the same time, but they're affecting each other. Back at the physiological aspects chart, and you don't have to go back, it's very important to realize that those arrows were pointed on both ends. And so you get that idea that
We'll just go back.
yeah. So you know these each one of these ovals here on the outside could represent those stones that were thrown in the water, and you know they go out and they start having an effect on each other. The ripples affect each other that's why the arrows are pointed on both ends here. And it doesn't matter where the problem started. It could be that you show up with thyroid symptoms on the left there by hormone circle. You show up with a very typical cluster of symptoms. Sounds like thyroid. Let's check the thyroid. Yep, pat myself on the back. I found your problem, Mrs. Smith. It's your thyroid. And here's your thyroid medicine. Hope you feel better. Come back in 3 months. We'll retest. Now, to think that that's the only thing going on with Mrs. Smith is almost nuts to us, because we know, and we've tested, we've run multiple labs. We looked at all the other data points to see the complete picture, and that's why we use metabolic chaos in the middle there as the real problem. And so you can go back to where we know. Oh, by the way, stay there just for a sec. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look. You see where it says immune system and mucosal surface integrity. So today we're just going to look at that one thing, keeping in mind that it is not operating in a silo. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the mucous membranes are incredibly important barriers between the inside of the body and all of the different things that have an effect on it from the outside mostly. And even from some of our own toxins that we produce, there's protection from that. So the most important one that people think about all the time, there's a lot of questions around, and there's a lot of lab work around the GIT, the gastrointestinal tract, and we can measure that. So obviously you're letting food in and keeping, unwanted bionts out. So there's a very, very sophisticated, very thin, somewhat fragile and very complex layer of cells between that world of food coming down, let's say, into the small intestine. And then what gets in the body is really determined by this one single layer of cells. It's really, really important to understand how sensitive that is. And so on the big picture, it's, if you ever seen a dog drinking dirty water and you wonder why they're not getting sick, it's because they have this incredibly strong mucosal barriers. Now we have a strong mucosal barrier also if we're normal and healthy. And one of the key ingredients is the secretory IgA. Remember, we're in the business of measuring things. So you want to measure how well is this working here. And one of the key ingredients is that the other thing going on inside the gut, obviously, is the digestion and breaking down and assimilating those particles of food, the wanted things. So we look at just a whole host of elements there. Let's go to the next slide and see what we see there. So here's just a little closer. We're zooming in now on those little villi, these little finger-like projections that come up from the surface of the gut called the lamina propria. That's a loose layer of connective tissue with that layer on the outside that again protects you. It spreads out the surface. You know how big that surface is if you took it all out, including there's actually little tiny hairs on these little tiny hairs that you're not even looking at. And it's supposedly about as big as a um, tennis court. So that's how much surface area there is in your gut. The surface area is about as much as a tennis court. I wouldn't care if you argued with me and said, no, it's only half a tennis court. Like, who cares? It's freaking huge. And that's wonderful because you've got all this area that's going to be able to absorb all the nutrients, all the proteins and fats and carbohydrates and the vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids and all the phytonutrients and trace elements, all the wonderful, beautiful stuff that's in food, which by the way is absolutely required genetically to be healthy. You want all that coming through. You just want to keep out the garbage. And so that's what we're looking at here, and we have ways of measuring it. Now, another part besides the secretory IgA are there's just other elements in there, and in this context of this, we're probably not going to go into a heck of a lot of details. I don't know if we're making these slides available, but they're all available in the FDN course. This is what we teach. This is what we go over.
Since these slides are from the course, we are not making them available.
Okay, so one of the things I want to note at the bottom right-hand screen, zonulin is released to flush the garbage and immune complexes back into the gut lumen. So a lot of people know a lot about secretory IgA. Yeah, that's the immune system in your gut, which is most of your immune system. It's preventing garbage, all the unwanted biological material, even some of the just chemical stuff. It's preventing it from getting inside, but things still get inside anyway. And we have this natural flushing ability so that in that lamina propria, the bottom layers there in the picture on the left, you want to open up the tight junctures and flush out garbage back into the gut lumen. And if that was working perfectly normally, well, what a happy state that would be. But people don't come to us in this happy state. They come to us where that zonulin and those tight junctures are now maybe they're staying open longer, maybe not even closing all the way. There's lots of chance for dysfunction there, which we just call basically leaky gut. Let's go to the next slide. And again, the mucosal barrier, like your second skin. We're going into a lot of detail here. Again, Elizabeth pulled these right out of the course, so they're quite detailed. You can see here a microscopic view of the villi and the little tiny hairs you can even see on top. They're called microvilli. You see a little bit of that. Now this gets suppressed. The kind of more dysfunctional a person appears to us, the more stress there is on this area. And that stress could be all kinds of things. Remember, this is your first line of defense against ingested pathogens. So if you're eating germs, they're going to get handled there. But one of the problems, you probably heard this word, and Elizabeth told you about it, stress. And it doesn't matter what kind of stress, it throws off another measurement we take on every single person, the cortisol to DHEA ratio. So when you have high cortisol in relationship to DHEA, you have stress, and that will have an effect on the secretory AG. It suppresses it. So let's look at that.
This is not showing up. Sorry.
It's okay. Go to the next one.
Okay, great.
So you here see even more detail, and I like this slide because it shows you inside the villi that there's some vessels there that help transport the good stuff. Hopefully all just good stuff. So, and it also shows the microvilli for the first time. And the microvilli, that little tiny brush border, those are little tiny hairs that undulate in the wind, so to speak. They actually help move food around, move things around, and help to flush out some of the bad stuff. They also produce their own enzymes that help start breaking down certain sugars and certain fats and things like that. So there's a whole lot of coordination going on. And you see the labels there on some of this. This is pure anatomy and physiology. It's really interesting and fun stuff. And so you see those single cells there on layering the villi, and some of the food gets flushed right through those cells in a proper way. So it's we're going to go through there, and some of it's going to go into the black blood vessels, and those are, by the way, those are vessels that are bringing blood to this area, and they're taking blood back away. What's going to bring fresh oxygenated blood for the function of the cell itself, and then it's going to take, so the venous part of it is going to take your food particles directly to the liver through the hepatic portal system. So it's a very, very interesting and I think amazing part of digestion is how food passes through these cells. Now, the fats, they go into that big part in the middle called the lacteal. You can see central lacteal. So some of your fats, your bigger fats, that goes directly into the lymphatic system. That's not going to all go to the liver. If it all went to the liver, we'd all have congested livers. And our livers are sensitive enough to the regular garbage, we wouldn't want to be sending a lot of extra fat that way. So a lot of the fat that you absorb through the villi goes into the lymphatic system for more processing there. Let's see what the next slide is. So that's all sort of normal stuff that we talked about, how it's supposed to work. Food comes down into the small intestine. After it's obviously you chew it. We have a whole primer on digestion that's wonderful. Talks with how the limbic system and smelling food and how that's really important part of digestion. You chew your food up, you swallow it, it goes into the stomach. There's chemicals there that will help break it down further, start processing the proteins, and oh, by the way, kill a lot of bacteria and all kinds of nasty little critters that might be in there. But it's going to pass through to the small intestine and get absorbed, as we just saw, through those blood vessels and lacteals inside the villi. That's normal. But that's not how people come to us. They come to us with all kinds and all degrees of dysfunction. And one of the places we can look at certain markers and see exactly what's going on. So without having to do an endoscopy, shoving cameras down someone's throat and all this sort of medical stuff, we can just look at test results and it'll tell us if you've got this villus atrophy and crypt hyperplasia. The crypts are the little spaces between the villi, and they basically swell up. And so you've got villus atrophy where they're shortened. You've got hyperplasia where the space between them is blown up, swelled up, and we can measure the chemicals that come out of there. We measure the zonulin, as we mentioned on a previous slide, and here we're looking at diamine oxidase as a good measurement as to whether you have this crypt hypoplasia or not. So we're envisioning the damage done. And there's a pill camera view there that's, I don't think it's a brilliant picture, but it shows you how erosion can be very widespread. And it's worth mentioning here, Elizabeth, if you want to comment at all, jump in anytime, about you don't even have to have any symptoms yet. Most people come to us with symptoms, but it's remember, symptoms are the last thing to occur. So all this damage could be going on for quite some time before you get the symptoms. And here we're looking at it once again in even more detail. We like to make sure you truly get the idea of paracellular uptake or transcellular uptake. Which one's better? Well, for food, you want transcellular uptake. You have those little mucosal cells with the little tiny hairs on them showing there. You want food, the good stuff, to diffuse through that, and it will end up going into the little vessels that lie right underneath it and being carried off into the liver for further processing before the liver sends it out to your body. So I've actually had physicians say, well, how do those supplements work? How do they work anyway? How does that stuff get in your body? Well, the same way food does. You digest food and you digest supplements the same way. They diffuse through the villi in a quote unquote healthy and normal gut and eventually make it their way into the liver. Now, the liver can change them. This is why we're very careful about the type of supplements we use. And we understand the interactions that might be taking place in other parts of the body. And eventually then the liver is going to detoxify, make sure that these things are pure, and then it will finally release it out into the body where it's going to visit everywhere there is to visit. So I think this idea here, intestinal permeability, you can see what's happened. You had your normal gut that we looked at. You had the normal gut, the normal villi, the normal absorption of food. Everybody's happy. The normal defense against unwanted bions, whether it be parasites, bacteria, funguses, viruses, and things. Now, here we're running into where remember I showed you the villi have been beat down. The villi have been beat down. The crypts, the spaces between the villi might be swollen up, and it kind of just starts to look flat. And if that isn't bad enough, you've got this paracellular uptake. Things are now sneaking, unwanted things are now sneaking into the lamina propria, and all hell can break loose. Inflammation and just sort of every kind of disorder will kick in at this point. This is where you start to get really symptomatic. And I'm seeing some questions pop up. Let's take those. Elizabeth, if you want to watch and see it, think if we should answer it now or answer it later. But you can certainly read this slide. It's word for word exactly what's going on inside the body. I don't like to, during these things, read slides. You can do that yourself. If you're looking at a recording of this, then if there is one, stop the film and read through it. Stop the video. So intestinal permeability is when it gets leaky. Things are now leaky. And it's going to set off a cascade of inflammation, and worse than that, you're going to get all kinds of symptoms. And so do we just treat symptoms? Well, there's anti-inflammatories. Hell, you could just quit eating that food. That's often not a bad thing to do if a food is causing some of this. You could treat the parasites, bacteria, funguses, and viruses. But Elizabeth, what do we always say about bugs? Are they the
That
problem, or
they are the result of the problem always.
they're the result of the problem? And so the problem is that you've been under assault and stress and eating the wrong foods and you name it, toxins and things for so long that you've lost normal immunity, you've lost normal function, especially if you have the high cortisol DHA. Remember, the body doesn't care what kind of stress you're suffering from. Elizabeth did a good job showing you, hey, if it's mental, emotional, stress, cortisol DHA ratios out, the secretory IgA will start to dissipate, go down. You lose immunity when you're under stress. If it comes from hating your job or just hating your situation, whatever it is, existential angst is also important. I think having no purpose in life creates anxiety, which creates a catabolic condition. And we measure that in every single person. You're catabolic, your body's breaking down. So the bugs aren't the problem. They come along and become the problem once you're compromised. And the point on this slide is that we've sort of tried to contain it to the villi and the lamina propria. And that can get real inflamed. You could have a lot of digestive symptoms. You got your heartburn, your gas, your indigestion, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, the famous alternating constipation and diarrhea, fun one. But what happens is when it goes on long enough, now it's getting into the bloodstream, these toxins and immune complexes and things. And then you really tick off your you really tick off the immune system. Now you have inflammation and irritation, not just in the gut, but now it could be your joints. It could be migraine headaches. It could be just about anything people show up with. Bad skin, bad attitude, foggy thinking, all kinds of stuff now because it's gone humoral. In other words, it's gone into the bloodstream. This is what we call at this point the autoimmune conditions. So they come almost always from right here. You see in the middle of the screen on the right, normal tight junctions, leaky and inflamed. And it's just poor health. The bottom line is poor health once it hits that bloodstream. So what's next?
So next, we're going to talk about the mucosal barrier assessment. So now we've shown you the problem, we've shown you the anatomy, what it should look like, what it looks like when it's not functioning, all of the problems that arise from that. So how do we measure that as FDNs? We have a finger stick test called the mucosal barrier assessment that is going to measure 3 biomarkers. So the first one is zonulin, and this is the peptide that is sending the chemical signature to the tight junctions to open. And they're doing that because, as Reed pointed out, when that junk gets into the lamina propria, it's got to go back out to the lumen. So this is sort of the emergency hatch where that junk kind of knocks on the back of the tight junction and says, hey, can you open so I can go back out into the lumen and get carried out of the body? And so zonulin is that chemical which loosens the tight junction for a short period of time, and then it dissipates and that tight junction closes again. So when we see an elevated zonulin, then we know that too many tight junctions are open at one time. So a lot of people say to me, but Elizabeth, can't we just assume everybody has leaky gut? Like, why do we have to actually measure it? Well, because not only does this test tell us the severity of the leaky gut and the chronic nature of its presence, but it also shows us the immune burden that comes from having leaky gut, which is a very important thing to understand. So First of all, we look at histamine. Histamine is released from mast cells in that lamina propria immune layer side. And so when this junk flows down through open tight junctions, then it's the histamine cells that sort of grab onto that and say, you cannot pass go, you cannot collect $100, you cannot proceed to the bloodstream. So then the histamine is causing this sort of inflammatory protective response to keep that junk from filtering out into general circulation. But this is why it gets trapped in the lamina propria then. It can't go anywhere. And then the lamina propria gets junked up with all of this trash, which is why we need then zonulin to open the tight junctions to flush it back out. So when histamine and the toxins or bad particles or whatever it is that the histamine stopped get flushed out into that gut lumen, then we want to have an enzyme that can break down that histamine so that we don't have chronic inflammation happening. And that is our DAO, or our diamine oxidase. That is an enzyme that's going to chew up histamine once it's done its job. So we want to look and see how that DAO is showing up. And so for this guy, it's showing up low. So he is starting to not have DAO available to him on that gut lumen side. And that can show us, because DAO is made in those crypts that Reed was talking about, that if the crypts are hyperplasic, if they're swollen and blown out, then we're not going to be able to make DAO. So if DAO is getting low, it might tell us that our villi are atrophied or stamped down or flat, which means our ability to digest is compromised, our ability to assimilate nutrients is compromised, and our crypts are potentially hyperplasic, and we're not able to make this counterbalance to histamine. So then we want to be able to look at those two things in relationship to each other. So for histamine and for the antihistamine, that is DAO, how are those things balancing out? Do we have a pro-inflammatory environment, or do we have an anti-inflammatory environment? And for this person, we see that their histamine to DAO ratio is really high, meaning that they don't have enough DAO to counterbalance the histamine. And this is absolutely a pro-inflammatory environment that's happening in the gut. So this is the test that we use to measure it.
Let me just add a
Yes,
point to that.
please.
Excellent job. Thank you. So one thing I wanted to point out, it's a fine point, but these things are moving targets. So they're fluctuating. And we're taking a point in time when a person is coming to us highly symptomatic. You know, they're having trouble. They wouldn't be in front of us. They wouldn't be paying us money to run labs and tell them the things they could do to heal themselves. So all of these markers that we look at are, and why we measure is so that we know exactly what's going on with that person, and it explains to that person. This client will be so thankful that we explained it to them. Look at the zonulin. Now, the green on the left would be low, meaning reasonable. And on the far right, it's very high, which would be very unreasonable, very dysfunctional. It's kind of in the middle. What does that tell you? Is that okay because it's in the middle? No, because guess what? It's probably headed to the right. So I like to say these are moving targets. This is a person who's getting worse, not better. And it correlates highly with the way they're showing up. Remember, they've gone through probably just some symptom relief. They were taking their whatever they were taking to try to feel a little bit better. And now they're done with that. Like, I can't find, any really, now it's just really getting bad. Well, then we look at their histamine and we see how high it is on the right. So high histamine, they're reacting to something. Again, stress is a huge factor. Now, there's histamine in some foods, but we're going to push that off to the side for a second. Just go look. Yeah, histamine's high. So you're going to have inflammation. And then you look at the DAO, which is supposed to metabolize the histamine, and it is on the low side. You see, because that's just the way these quintile graphs work. So the histamine is high, the DAO is low, And so you don't have enough DAO to digest or break down the histamine. So you've got a perpetuating, well, that's inflammation for you. That's how it works. And that's why we look at the ratio, because sometimes it's hard to tell from just those two middle line graphs there. So we look at the ratio. Yep, the histamine is really high in relationship to the DAO. So that explains a whole lot of symptoms. And it gets your client going, oh, wow, thank you for explaining it. Thank you for showing me, and not just selling me some pills to get rid of the symptoms. Because now this tells us what we need to do to fix things.
Excellent. Thank you, Reed. And of course, we always want to remind ourselves as FDNs that our approach is to help every person in a unique way. Everybody is bioindividual. Everybody comes with maybe similar symptoms, but for very different reasons. Everyone's flavor or temperature of metabolic chaos is different. And we respect bioindividuality, and we respect that we need to take a different tailored approach for each person. So we never treat the paper. The paper isn't the problem. The paper is telling us about the extent of the lifestyle that has gone on before that, the extent of the imbalances, but the paper itself isn't the problem. So we never want to say, oh, just, come back, take these and come back in a few months and let's remeasure. See if we move the marker on the paper. That's not a measure of success for an FDN. The measure of success for an FDN is how the person feels and how we've been able to move their case forward. So every test is going to be interpreted relative to this unique individual. How have they lived their lives? What has gone on in their history? What are they eating? How are they sleeping? What are they doing for exercise? What are they doing? What kind of stress load are they carrying? And how does this inform the numbers that I see on the paper? So that's what we mean by identifying the entire constellation of healing opportunities so that we can successfully connect the dots by creating a DRESS protocol, diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation, that is unique for each person, respects and complements their bioindividuality, and helps them to achieve their health outcomes and their health goals. So this is where we are going to end for the day, and we would love to take some questions if you have them about the mucosal barrier, about anything that we talked about today, about the FDN methodology, any questions you might have about the course. We're here to answer your questions.
I noticed Cam wrote a question in here, the last question. Is it likely or possible then that zonulin will be low on tests if someone's gut has been destroyed for some time? And it's, anything's possible. So we do see in certain dysfunctional situations that they just can't make it anymore when it comes to cortisol and other things. They're just unable to really produce. We see this with the sex hormones a lot and other things. With zonulin, it's a little tricky. But I would say because it's such a ubiquitous ingredient or chemical, you're not going to see zero zonulin very much because it's everywhere in the body. It's not just in the gut. Here we looked at it relative to tight junctures in the gut, but you have tight junctures all over your body. So there's lots of places zonulin is being made, and you probably aren't going to see zero.
Yep.
Mhm. So it's a great question, though, and it tells me you're thinking the right way. For the rewatch, I guess you subscribe to our YouTube channel. How the mucosal barrier has an impact on the balance for blood glucose. Uh, I probably would say it the other way around. People with glucose metabolism issues, it's just like we said before, the arrow's pointed on both ends. You have metabolic chaos. So you've got dysfunction in the mucosal barrier, you've got imbalances in blood glucose, and neither one is good for the other. It's kind of which came first, the chicken or the egg. The top 5 things anyone do to heal the mucosal barrier. Number 1 is find out what the stressors are. So there's a list of things that are soothing. You can start to repair the tight junctures. You can get rid of the bugs. But so what we do in FDN is we follow a complete diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. Those are the top 5 things. Eat the right foods and don't eat any of the wrong foods. Make sure you're getting a lot of rest and really good deep sleep so your body can send its repairmen out and do all the repair work. So diet, rest. Exercise is important because you have to move lymph around. You've got to get good circulation. You want to stay strong and flexible and things like that. Stress reduction, again, is probably one of the biggest things. We test everybody for food sensitivities because it's going to be really hard to repair that mucosal barrier if you're eating foods that your body's reacting to. And then there's lots of supplements. So I'm glad you didn't say what are the top 5 supplements because I probably wouldn't have answered it. I would go, oh boy, here we go. People, you think it's supplements. So again, it's the top 5 things are diet, the right foods and none of the wrong foods, rest, exercise, stress reduction. In every way it can be identified, including what we can test for, which are food sensitivities, parasites, bacteria, funguses, viruses, and things. And then, of course, take your supplements. We coach up function. We want to nurture. Supplements are meant to nurture and support good, healthy gut function and healing. There are things that will promote or stimulate healing. And then, but again, eliminating the stressors is probably where we would start. I hope that our MD from Ireland is having a great Ireland day. There's a nighttime there now. We just graduated. So I do these post-grad interviews with every single graduate from our program. We interview and we talk. And the one I did this morning, I have another one this afternoon, was from Ireland. She's in Dublin. I actually recognized the map of Dublin she had behind her. Yeah, Dublin, another one. Sandra. Any other questions you see there?
Yeah, we've got a couple.
Okay.
So Nan would like to know, is this dysfunction happening in the small or large intestine or both?
Well, you're going to find it in both. Here we were looking at small intestine because that's where a big part of your immune system is. So as we look at the hormones and the immune system, we see that stress affects the hormones, and the next domino to fall happens to be the secretory IgA. We didn't go over that test today, but it's one we would run along with this test. And so we always know what the SIG-A is looking like. And we find that it's very dry. You get very thinned out layers, very dry. Mucosal barrier should be, you think of mucus, should be wet and slimy, right? Well, it gets all dried out by the time it gets to this villus atrophy and crypt hyperplasia and things. And so we'd want to do more measurements to answer that question correctly. You want to add something to that?
Yeah, so the functioning of the small intestine and the large intestine are largely dependent on having nice tall villi and then these crypts in between them, these valleys in between them. That's where we have this like really sticky mucosal layer Reed was talking about needs to be wet down there, but that's where your good bacteria live. And so when that gets flattened out and when the crypts get hyperplagic and swollen, that then your commensals have no place to live. And so that just sets off a whole another chain of dysfunction, along with the immune problem of not being able to make secretory IgA. So excellent.
And there's another connection that's very interesting. So it's a good question. We like to have these conversations in FDN where the the colon, which is where food has moved from the large intestine, from the small intestine through the ileocecal valve into the large intestine, where very little nutrients are absorbed after that fact. There's some minerals maybe come out with the water. So the idea of this large intestine is to dehydrate this food, so you want to pull the water out of it so you can evacuate it as well-formed bowel movements. And so we're pulling the water out. Some minerals might come out with that. And again, it goes to the liver through the mesentery into the liver. Your liver taking on a lot of abuse, actually. But there's a chance for that ileocecal valve to be dysfunctional. And it happened a lot. When I was in a chiropractic, we saw dysfunctional ileocecal valve, bad the nerves and things like that at the spine can create problems there. And you'll get some of the bad bacteria kind of backing up or creeping into the small intestine. And we could even create a condition called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's not the only cause of SIBO, but it's a possibility. So they are intimately connected, and you got to look at it all. It's why we don't just run one test. We look at what's upstream, and we look at what's right there in the gut, and we always do a stool test. So we're looking at what's coming out the other end too.
So staying on the anatomy track for a second, Adina would like to know, do food sensitivities ever go away?
Some, it depends on how they got there. So there's people who just genetically don't make the enzymes and things that will break certain foods down. Like typical is the lactose intolerance. Like you're not making lactase, which breaks down the lactose, which is your milk sugar. So you're always going to have that sensitivity to dairy if you're eating it. And you would know this probably from gas and different things that occur when you eat dairy. You could also have other types of sensitivity to dairy. It can affect the mucosal membrane, especially in the nose. Like when I eat ice cream, I get like, I have to clear my throat all the time. So that's a sign, that's a signal. Your body's telling you, hey, you probably should leave dairy to baby cows and not people. But not everyone's the same. You might do okay with that. And it might be that like cow's dairy is not, you're not able to handle it. People often say, well, I can do goat's milk just fine. And it's all such a highly individual thing. Um, um, where was I going with that? Like the idea of these food sensitivities going away. Now, normally you could just that's not going to agree with you. That's more of an oral intolerance than it is purely the immune system not handling something very well. Your immune system can look at some of these things, especially when the immune system is on heightened awareness, as bad for you. Hey, it starts looking at that food as if it was some kind of parasite or bacterial, and it will attack it in a way to create inflammation and lots of things. So we run a food sensitivity test to take all the guessing out of it. It's called a mediator release test. It actually measures mediator release of that food. You don't have to challenge this test. It's not an immunoglobulin test. It's a little more deeper, sensitive kind of a test. If you showed up first time around, let's say you've got leaky gut and you got all these things going on. Your hormones out of balance, your digestion isn't real good, you're not detoxifying really well, things are kind of stuff. You could have a lot of food sensitivities. It just occurs. It just kind of they grow on you like that. But then after you repair and rebuild and restore and do all the work, it could be 3 months, 6 months, you could start reintroducing some of those foods and see how well you do. Most people don't miss the foods that we would recommend they eliminate. You're just not going to miss them because you're going to feel better not eating them.
We have a few questions whose central theme is how are secretory IgA and intestinal permeability related to each other?
Well, yeah, they are intimately related in that the secretory IgA is the main ingredient, it's the main defense ingredient in that mucosal layer in the gut. So remember one of the diagrams, you've got them all throughout the body, the vagina, the penis, you've got mucosal barrier everywhere, the conjunctiva of the eyes and the nasal passages. So you've got this mucosal barrier, and it can get destroyed a little bit or a lot. And in the gut, it could be a lot. So when that mucosal barrier thins out, you might see secretory IgA go down to a previous question about, hey, what if you don't have any SIG-A? Well, you got a destroyed gut lining pretty much, and other mucosal barriers too. Very thinned out, very dry mucosal barrier. And so that's, I think, intimately connected with leaky gut because as it dries out, you're gonna have more tight junctures problems. They just kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's great. I like to think of secretory IgA when it is policing these mucosal barriers, the barriers are separating the inside of your body from the outside world. And I like to think of the SIG-A as sort of the bouncer at the door who wants to make sure that only friendly, helpful, productive individuals will come in and everyone else stays out. And so we want to make sure that our SIG-A is nice and robust and able to do that. And if the SIG-A is low, if the immune system is tapped out, if the gut is destroyed, if there isn't any money to be spent on immunity, then we're going to see that our bouncer is in the next room lying down because he has a headache and everybody's coming in. Or we might see that that bouncer is really, really stressed out and hypervigilant because he's getting hit from a million sides and he doesn't know what to do. And when we are stressed out and hypervigilant, we make bad choices. And so does the immune system under those circumstances, and it can lead to more metabolic chaos. So they are intimately connected.
Yeah, good job.
Let's see. So we've got some coaching question. We got one coaching question here. The question is, for patients who have busy careers and do not have a regular schedule, how do you advise them to be successful?
Yeah, sometimes it just comes down to discipline, but you can provide some good coaching for them. And listen, that you can't escape the laws of nature. So this is something we coach our clients up on all the time, that you will pay the piper if you don't behave yourself. And so behavior becomes what coaching's all about. We simplify it a lot. Number one, we run the lab, so we can provide the data to people that shows them where, by their own devices, here's where you've landed. Whatever you've been doing, prior to now, here's where you landed. You've got hormone imbalances. You got immune system over or underactive. You got digestive problems. You're not really breaking down, absorbing all that wonderful good food you're eating, or you're eating crap. But either way, you got hormone, immune, digestive problems, detoxification issues, liver congestion. And the liver is just one organ we measure. You have the lymph and the colon. You have the lungs are detoxifiers. The skin is a detoxifier. So we're looking at hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification. We look at how energy is being produced on a cellular level, and nervous system balance, the autonomic system, as Elizabeth pointed out. So when you do all of that, you're giving someone the reason why they have to change their behavior. See, without a bigger why, people will go, well, I'll just keep drinking myself to sleep every night. Whatever the hell it is they're doing,
It's
right?
true. It's true.
Like, yeah, well, it works for me. But those are coping systems. They're not the real system that produces the real good result. You're just coping with all the stressors and daily life and things and bad environment and whatever it might be. So we teach people, instead of coping, to actually take very proactive steps. And that's very laid out. It flows so naturally from the data. So when you have hormone, immune, digestion, detox, you got all the problems, the reason why they feel like crap. And here's the steps. Here's the very simple, very well laid out, very individualized diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. That spells DRESS, DRESS. We call it dress for health success. That's your epigenetic lifestyle that will get you different results. So you lived yourself into this problem for the most part, and you're going to live yourself out of it. You just need to give them the bigger why. And the data is the why. Look, it's only going to get worse. And we have other ways of sort of pulling out motivating um, factors to be able to coach them up, hold them accountable later on. But if you don't do steps 1 and 2, step 1 is run the lab, step 2 is create the program. Then you run the program. So you need a good program to run. You can't just tell them, okay, diet and exercise, because they already heard that crap before, like everyone knows that, right? Sleep, so a lot of things we say, DRESS, are common knowledge, but with the data that is backing up every single area that shows them and by the way, gives you a baseline to measure improvements later on. All you personal trainers out there, you know that you get their height and their weight, and you see how strong they are, and all these things, and then they go through your program, and then you measure later. Oh, look, you're stronger. You lost a few pounds. You have more energy. You have clearer thinking. You're more on it. You're more on your game. That's how we work too.
Amazing. Thank you, Reed. That was fantastic. And that brings us to the end of our time. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're really, really happy to have you here today and for your participation and your questions, which were excellent. Please join us next week on Tuesday for a dress workshop, which will be hosted by myself and Brandy Buskow. And we'll go in depth into our 5 pillars of diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Good job, Bill. See ya. Bye. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks, Brenda.